Her family did not get lost. They left her on purpose. Rowena Ash was 22 years old, alone in a mountain pass with a bad hip and no horse and a blizzard 3 hours out, and she stood in the snow and watched the wagon roll away from her. Not slow, not stopping. The kind of steady that means somebody made a decision and did not want to be talked out of it. They had sent her for firewood. They knew she was slow. They planned it. If you have ever been thrown away by the people who were supposed to love you most, stay with me. This one is for you. Let me take you back to the clearing, and the tracks in the snow, and the man who found her when she had stopped expecting anyone would. The storm came in fast, the way the worst ones do in high country. One hard shift of the wind, and then the sky went the color of dirty iron from one edge to the other. Rowena felt it before she saw it. She had been in the trees maybe 20 minutes, snapping dead branches from the low boughs and stuffing them into the canvas sling on her shoulder. The cold had already worked through her wool coat and into her left side, which always stiffened first. The hip had never healed right after the wagon threw her 2 summers back. Her stepmother called it her bad side, the way you would call a tool broken. She looked up through the branches. The light was wrong. Too dim for afternoon and yellow at the edges. That sky meant snow, and not the gentle kind. She turned back toward camp. The sling was half full. Prudence had been plain that morning. Fill it all the way. Don't come back short. Rowena had learned not to argue with Prudence about firewood, or about much of anything. She came out of the trees into the clearing where the wagon had been. The wagon was not there. For a moment she only stood and looked at the empty space, the way you look at a thing that has not started to make sense yet. There were ruts where the wheels had sat, a flat patch where the mule had stood all morning, boot prints, many of them, and one small set, her own, leading off into the trees. "Papa?" Her voice came out smaller than she meant. She tried again, louder. Nothing came back but wind. She made herself look at the tracks, and the tracks did not lie. The wagon had been turned. The mule had backed and repositioned and gone east, deeper into the pass, not back the way they had come. The wheel ruts were deep and even. The pace was not panicked. Nothing had spooked. They had walked away from her on purpose, at a measured pace, and they had not looked back. Rowena sat down in the snow. She did not cry. Not yet. She sat on the frozen ground and looked at the tracks going east, and she thought about the night 3 weeks back, when she had been half asleep in the wagon and their voices had carried on the still air. "The girl can't make the pass, Josiah. Not with that leg. She'll slow us, and we'll all die trying to carry her. She's my daughter. She's a cost we can't afford. You know it same as I do. We've 3 others to think of." A long silence. Then her father, low and tired. "I'll think on it." She had told herself she misheard. She had told herself her father would never. She had not misheard. Her hand went to her coat pocket, the way it always did when the world tilted, and closed around the one thing in it that mattered. A small knife with a handle of yellowed bone, worn smooth by her mother's hand before it was worn smooth by hers. It was the only thing of her mother's she had. She had carried it 8 years. It was worth almost nothing, and she would have died before selling it. She held it in her fist in the snow, and she made herself remember the rest of that overheard night, because forgetting it was the thing that had left her standing here. She had crept to the front of the wagon that night, quiet on her hands so the boards would not creak, close enough to see them by the low fire. Her father's shoulders had been bent. Prudence had been sitting very straight, the way she sat when she had already won and was only waiting for the other person to catch up to it. "We could leave her at the Dutchman's," Josiah had said. Pay her keep through winter. Come back in spring." "There is no coming back in spring," Prudence had said. "You know that as well as I do. The Dutchman's a 2-day ride off the route, and we've no food to spare for her keep and no gold to pay it. You'd be leaving her to be somebody else's burden and calling it mercy." "Then what would you have me do?" A silence. And then Prudence, in a voice with no heat in it at all, which was the worst part because heat would have meant she was uncertain, "The mountain does it for us. She goes for wood. We go on. By the time she's back, we're an hour gone, and the storm does the rest. Nobody has to do anything. Nobody has to say they did. She's a child," Josiah had said. "My child. She's a grown woman with a ruined leg who eats and rides and gives back less than she costs." And Prudence had reached over and put her hand on his arm, gentle. "The way you gentle a horse before you do the thing it will not like. We have 3 that can make the pass. We cannot save the one that can't. That's not cruelty, Josiah. That's arithmetic." A long silence. Then her father's voice, low and tired and already surrendered. "I'll think on it." Rowena had crept back to her blankets and lain awake till dawn, and in the morning she had told herself she'd dreamed it, or twisted it, that her father would think on it and think better of it, that there were some things a person simply did not do. She had been wrong about the last part. That was the thing she had learned in the clearing. There was no thing a frightened person would not do if someone they trusted told them the numbers said to. She got up because sitting was dying, and she was not ready to die yet. She spent the first night under a dead-fall spruce with a fire the size of her 2 fists, because fire is light and light can be seen. And she did not know who moved through this pass in November. She ate the last of what she had, half a hard biscuit and a thumb of dried meat from her pocket. It was nowhere near enough. She took inventory the way you do when panic is a thing you cannot afford. 1 wool coat, worn but whole, boots, good leather, a little big, the canvas sling, a flint striker, the bone-handled knife, a tin cup, no food, no water but melted snow. In the morning she followed the wagon tracks east, not because she thought they would come back. She had stopped thinking that. East was the way out of the pass, and out of the pass there might be a settlement, a trapper, someone. By the second afternoon she knew she was not going to make it. The first night had nearly finished her. She had lain under the deadfall with her fists of fire burning down to coals, and every time she surfaced from the shallow, cold, broken sleep, she had been aware of how dark it was, and how far from anything human, and how completely alone she had become. She had thought about Thomas, the older of her stepbrothers, 16, who had once taught her to whistle through a blade of grass, and who had watched her walk toward the trees that last morning. With a look on his face she had not been able to read, and now thought she could. She had thought about her father, holding her hand through the long fever the winter her mother died, telling her in his quiet way that she was the image of Ellen, and that he was grateful she was his. She had turned that memory over and over in the dark, and could not make it fit against the tracks in the snow. And finally, she had stopped trying, because trying cost warmth, and she had none to spend. In the morning the tracks were mostly gone under new snow, but she could still make out the faint trough where the wheels had cut. She followed it as best she could, slow, stopping often for the hip. By midday she had to leave the firewood behind. It was too heavy, and her hands were going numb trying to grip the sling, and dropping it felt like dropping the last thing she owned. The snow came steady after that. Not the blizzard she feared, not yet, but a wet, patient snow that found her collar and melted on her skin and froze again when the wind rose. Her coat was soaked by noon. She was soaked through by mid-afternoon. She remembered a thing an old trapper had said once, passing through her father's post in Kansas when she was small. "You stop shivering when you're really in trouble," he'd said. "Shivering's your body fighting. When it stops, you've run out of fight. She was still shivering. Barely, she found a hollow between two boulders, out of the wind, and sat down against the cold stone. She had no wood, and her fingers were past the place where they could work a flint. She leaned her head back. "I don't want to die," she thought. She thought it with mild surprise, the way you note an interesting fact. "I am 22, and I have never been anywhere or done anything, and I do not want to die in the snow." The mountain did not care what she wanted. The snow was falling straight down now, thick and fast, settling on her coat and her hair. If she kept sitting, it would cover her, and by morning she would be a white shape that looked like a small stone. She could not quite make herself move. Then something changed. Not a sound. The absence of one. She opened her eyes. There was a shape between her and the sky. Large, she had heard no footsteps, which meant the snow was deep enough to swallow them, which meant she had been sitting here longer than she thought. The shape became a man, very tall, wide through the shoulders with the bulk that comes from years of hard work in the cold. A heavy fur coat, clearly made and not bought, the skins pieced rough but sound, no hat of any kind. Long, dark hair gone grey at the temples, loose to his shoulders and dusted with snow. A thick, grey, shot beard, a rifle across his back, something dead hanging from one hand. He was looking at her. Beside him stood a dog the size of a small wolf, pale grey, yellow-eyed, watching her with a stillness that was worse than any snarl. The man crouched, slow, the way you crouch near a thing that might bolt, though she was far too frozen to bolt anywhere. His eyes moved over her, dark and assessing. "You alive?" His voice was low, rough as gravel. Yes, the word came out thick. Her lips were not working right. "You alone?" Yes, he looked at the trees, at the snow coming down harder. Whatever he was working out, he reached the end of it. "Can you walk?" She tried her legs. The hip seized, and a sharp sound came out of her, not quite a cry. "No." He looked at her leg. Then he set the dead fox down, and unslung the rifle and set it down, and got one arm under her knees and one behind her back. "This will hurt," he said, which was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in a long time. It did hurt. The movement of her legs sent white fire up her spine, and her vision went dark at the edges. He did not stop and did not apologize. He stood, gathered the rifle and the fox in one motion, and started walking. "Where are you taking me?" "Cabin. How far?" "Far enough." She watched the snow fall past his shoulder and listened to his breathing, steady, the breathing of a man used to hard work, and then she stopped thinking anything at all for a while. She came back by degrees. Warmth first, deep in the bones. Then wood smoke and pine and something animal. Then the sound of a real fire in a hearth. Then pain, her hip a deep volcanic throb, her fingers and toes burning as the blood came back. She opened her eyes on rough timber close above her. She was on a cot under heavy furs. A stone fireplace took up most of one wall. A rough table, 2 chairs, shelves stacked with tins and pelts and traps. One window covered in oilcloth. And the grey dog, sitting 3 feet away, watching, "He won't trouble you unless I tell him to." The man was at the fire, his back to her. "What's his name?" "Bracken." She looked at the dog. His tail moved once, a slow sweep, and stopped. "What's yours?" A pause long enough that she thought he would not answer. "Vane. Silas Vane." "I'm Rowena Ash." He brought a cup of thin broth and held it out, and watched her struggle upright without offering to help. And when she was propped against the wall, he held it out again. "Drink it slow." It was thin and faintly salty, and the best thing she had ever tasted. "Thank you," she said. He had already turned back to the fire. She slept again, and when she woke the light was brighter, and she had lost most of a day. Silas Vane sat at the table working a length of wire into a trap, his hands moving with the economy of a man who had done the same thing 10,000 times. He was older than she had first thought. Past 45, she guessed. There was scarring up the side of his neck that disappeared behind his ear. And she did not ask about it. Over the next days, she pieced him together the way she had learned to read a house where she was not safe. He was a trapper, alone here a long time. The cabin was built for one. One chair angled to the fire, one cup, one plate, everything at a height that worked for a man his size. No letters, no likenesses, nothing that pointed to another person anywhere. Just the work of staying alive. The dog decided about her before the man did. On the second day, Bracken left his post by the door and came and lay down against the side of the cot, not touching her, just near, a grey weight she could feel through the frame. When Silas came in and saw it, something crossed his face that she could not read. "He doesn't do that," Silas said. "Do what?" "Pick people." He hung his coat. "Suit yourself," he told the dog, who did not move. She learned the dog's name was not the only strange thing about him. Bracken did not bark. In 4 days she never once heard him make a sound above a low chest rumble. When Silas went out to the lines, the dog stayed and positioned himself where he could see both her and the door, and she understood after a while that she had been left a guard, though whether the guard was for her or against her, she could not yet tell. On the 3rd day she tried to reach the shelf for her cup, and the hip quit mid-motion, and she went down hard, taking the shelf and the cup with her in a clatter. Silas appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. "I'm fine," she said, sitting in the wreckage. "You're not. I'm sitting on the floor by choice. It's restful." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. He picked up the shelf, drove 2 more nails into it, set her cup back, and held out his hand. He pulled her up in one smooth motion. "Don't do that again." She understood it was not a scolding. He had spent effort keeping her alive, and her falling was a threat to that effort. She was not a person to him yet. She was a responsibility he had picked up. "That is fine," she told herself. "That is the same as I have always been to everyone." But it was not entirely true, and she knew it. He had carried her out of a blizzard. He had not had to do that. On the 4th day, she was steady enough to think. She waited until evening, when he had come in off the line and was eating, and she sat down in the other chair. The one he had glanced at when she moved it. The look a man gives furniture that has been in one place so long its place is a fact. "I need to understand what this is." He looked at her over his bowl. What is? "This, me being here. What you expect. The terms." He set down his spoon. "What terms are you worried about?" "The obvious kind." He looked at her steady. "No," he said. "You don't have to worry about that. You're in no shape and you can't leave the mountain till spring. I'm not going to add to your trouble." She believed him, because he went back to eating, which meant he had said the whole of what he meant. "Then what do you need from me?" "Because I won't sit on that cot and eat your food and give nothing back. I won't do it." "Can you cook?" "Yes, mend. Yes, stay out of my way when I'm working?" "That depends how much way you need." The corner of his mouth moved again. "That's the deal, then. You cook and mend and keep the fire. I hunt and run the lines. Come spring, you leave." She nodded. "All right." She watched him a moment. "My family left me," she said. She had not planned to say it. It came out the way things do when they have been held too long. "They sent me for firewood and drove off while I was gone. My father, my stepmother, my 2 stepbrothers. I saw the tracks. They didn't panic. They chose it." Silas did not say anything. But he did not look away either, which she was grateful for. People usually looked away. "I'm telling you so you know I won't do anything foolish. Go after them." "Anything, I just needed to say it out loud to someone. I hadn't yet." He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, Eat something. There's more in the pot. You didn't take enough. It was not sympathy. It was more basic than sympathy. It meant you are alive, and staying alive is the work in front of us. She found to her surprise that it steadied her more than sympathy would have. The winter closed over the cabin like a fist, and the two of them lived inside it. She learned his silences the way she had once learned a dangerous house, except these silences held no threat in them, only weather. There was the tight silence that meant a trap had failed or a storm was coming, the working silence of a man turning a problem in his head. And a third kind, in the evenings, that felt more like presence than absence, and that she came, without deciding to wait for. She cooked. She mended. She kept the fire and learned the temper of the stove. She reorganized his shelves once and braced for him to mind, and he came in, looked at it, said that's better, and went back to work. And that was the whole of that. The days took a shape. Before light he went to the stove and drank coffee standing up, and then he was gone to the lines, and the cabin was hers and the dog's. She cooked and mended and kept the fire fed, and in the afternoons she watched the light move across the oilcloth and learned to tell the time of day by its color. He came back at dusk, sometimes with something for the pot, sometimes empty-handed and quiet about it, and they ate at the table with the dog between them, and the fire cracked, and neither of them filled the silence just to fill it. He did small things he never named. She woke one morning to find he had moved the cot a foot closer to the fire in the night, without a word, because she had been shivering in her sleep, and he had noticed. He came back from the lines one afternoon and set a pair of rabbit fur mittens on the table beside her mending, rough sewn, too big, and said only, "Your hands were blue yesterday," and went out again before she could answer. When her hip was bad, he did not offer to help her across the room, which she was grateful for, but she noticed he found reasons to be between her and anything she might fall against, and to have a hand free. She told him things, over the weeks, about her mother, dead of fever when Rowena was 14, who had called her a little hawk, always watching. About the accident that ruined her hip, the wagon tipping on a river grade, the wheel that came down across her. About the exact set of her stepmother's jaw when she looked at Rowena's leg and added up its cost. He never offered his own story back. The scar, the 11 years alone, whatever stayed behind the wall he kept. But he listened with a steadiness she started to trust, and sometimes that was more than she had ever had anywhere. Once, only once, she asked. Not for the whole of it, just the edge. The scar on your neck, she said. You don't have to tell me. I only wondered if it still hurts. He was quiet so long she thought she had broken something. Then he said, cold weather. Same as your hip. And after another silence, in a voice with the wall lowered just a hand's width, there was a fire. Long time back. People in it I couldn't get to. He did not say who. She did not ask. But she understood then the shape of the 11 years, the cabin built for one. The man who could feed a stranger and stitch her nothing of himself. He had gotten someone out of the cold once and failed, and he had been paying for it alone ever since. I'm sorry, she said. Long time back, he said again, and that was the door closing. Gently, and she let it close. Then came the morning Silas did not come back on time. She did not worry at first. She had learned the range of the lines. But the sky had been wrong all morning, that low iron gray with weight behind it, and the wind had been building from the northwest, which he had told her once was the bad direction. By dark the storm had arrived in full, throwing snow sideways, so the window showed nothing but white movement, and the cold pressed in through the chinking. Bracken was at the door. He only did that when he was waiting for Silas. 2 hours after dark the dog's head came up, and Rowena was on her feet before she had decided to move. She heard it a moment after he did, a wrongness in the wind, a pattern that was human and irregular. She pulled on one of Silas's old coats, huge on her, and opened the door. The cold hit like a wall. At the edge of the porch steps was a shape, moving, upright, but wrong. Listing, one leg not tracking. When the wind shifted, she saw his face was tight with something past cold. Silas. She was down the steps before she thought about the ice on them. He was heavy, far heavier than he looked, and putting almost no weight on his right leg. She got his arm across her shoulders, and they went up the steps, him on the rail, her taking what she could, her hip screaming an opinion she filed away for later. Inside, in the light, she saw it. His right leg below the knee was dark, not snow-wet dark, blood dark. Sit down. Something in her voice made him sit. He lowered himself with a care that told her how bad it was, because Silas Vane did not move carefully without cause. She cut the frozen trouser leg away with the bone-handled knife faster than trying to peel it, and looked at what was under it. A broken branch, the jagged kind a heavy snow load brings down without warning, had torn through the flesh of his lower leg. Long, deep in the center, oozing rather than pumping, which meant nothing major was cut. But it had bled a long time and frozen in layers instead of clotting. When? 2 hours back. Maybe more. You walked on this 2 hours. Didn't have another option. I have to clean it and close it. I know. She got the whiskey from the shelf above the door and the heavy canvas thread and the needle and set water to boil and tore rags into strips. She cleaned the wound with the knife's edge and the whiskey, and he made a sound that was almost nothing, but the muscle went rigid under her hands. Talk, he said through his teeth. What? Say something. Anything. So she talked. She did not know what about. The cornbread, the cornmeal, whether they had enough, while her hands did what they had to, and he held the back of the chair until the wood creaked. She talked because it gave him something to hold on to that was not the pain, and because talking steadied her own hands, and she understood now why he had said this will hurt to her in the snow, why he had named it plainly instead of soothing her. Soothing was a lie you told to make the other person feel better. The truth was a thing you could brace against. He had given her the truth because he had thought she could take it, and she had, and now she gave it back to him the same way. This next part is the stitching, she said. It's going to be worse than the cleaning. I'm not going to tell you it won't be. Good, he said, and something in the way he said it was almost a laugh. Then she threaded the needle. She had sutured twice in her life, once a dog with a torn ear when she was 16, and once her own hand when a knife slipped cutting rope. Both times she had felt the particular awful intimacy of pushing a needle through living flesh. And both times she had done it anyway because the other choice was worse. I have to stitch it. I've done it before, not this size. But I know how. He looked at her, and his face in the firelight was open in a way she had not seen, like the pain had taken down something he usually kept up. I believe you, he said. She had not expected that. She almost asked him to say it again. Instead she started, and worked the way her mother had taught her to work difficult cloth, not thinking too far ahead, just the next stitch and the next. She pulled the edges together as clean as the ragged wound would allow. He did not make a sound. He breathed, long and controlled, and she could feel him breathe in the small rise and fall of the leg under her hands. Now and then his hand tightened on the chair back until the wood groaned, and she would feel the muscle cord under her fingers, and wait a beat, and go on. Bracken pressed himself against Silas's good leg, and leaned there, having understood something was wrong and made his decision about it. 12 stitches. She tied off the last and sat back. It's done. He looked down at it and took a long breath through his nose. Thank you, he said, and his voice had changed, the layer over it gone. She wrapped the leg firm and got him to the cot and put a thin piece of wood on the fire so it would hold the night without burning hot, and pulled the second chair beside the cot. "I'll stay up, in case the fever starts." "You don't need to." "Silas," she said his name the way she would say stop. "Let me." His jaw worked, the particular difficulty of a self-sufficient man admitting that tonight he was not. "All right," he said. She sat, and the fire burned, and the blizzard threw itself at the walls, and she kept her eyes on his face and her hand near his, and watched for the fever, and did not sleep. The fever came on the second day. She had been watching for it, pressing the back of her hand to his forehead every few hours, the way her mother used to test bread dough. The first morning his skin was near normal, and she let herself hope. By the second evening it was dry and hot in a way that was not good, and by the middle of that night he was sweating through the furs, and his breathing had gone shallow. She kept cold cloths on him through the dark, rinsing the rag in the tin basin, wringing it, laying it back. It was tedious and probably only half-worked, and she did it anyway because it was the thing she could do. She changed the bandage and made herself look at the wound each time for the red line spreading out from it that would mean the bad kind of infection had taken hold. And it never came. Angry and swollen, yes, but no red line and no smell. That was the most important nothing in the world. He was not a good patient, which she had not expected him to be. In the worst of it, he surfaced into a half-waking that was not really waking and said things she could not assemble. A name once, or maybe two names, she could not tell. Something about a river. Something about a door he could not open. She did not try to answer any of it. She kept the cloth cold and the fire steady and the leg raised on a folded fur, and when he said the thing about the door for the third time, low and desperate, she took his hot hand in both of hers and held it until the words stopped, and told him, quietly, that everyone was out, that the door was open, that he could stop now. She did not know if it was true. She knew it was the thing he needed to hear, and sometimes that was the same as true. The fever broke on the third day, the way fevers do, all at once and messily, a night of hard sweating that left him pale and wrung out but clear-eyed in the morning for the first time since the branch took him down. She was not a good patient's nurse. Because he was not a good patient. He wanted to check the north line. She would not let him. "You've a hole in your leg I stitched shut 40 hours ago," she said. "You're not going anywhere. The traps need running. The traps will keep." He looked at the ceiling like a man revising his next argument, and drank the water she gave him under protest, and did not win. That night, sitting by the cot with the fire low and his breathing finally deep and even, she thought about what he had said in the snow, and about what she had become since. She tried to find the frightened girl she had been in that hollow between the boulders, and found she could remember her clearly, but she felt like someone Rowena had heard about, rather than been. It was not that the danger was less. His leg told the truth about the danger here. It was that she had been useful, really useful, in a way that mattered. The meals that fed them both, the stitches that would, she believed, hold, the hand she had held in the dark until a man stopped begging a burning door to open. Being needed was not the same as being loved, and she knew the difference, had spent her life confusing the two. But it was a kind of mattering that did not depend on anyone's approval or anyone's decision to keep her. You could be the reason you were still there. That was what had changed. Brocken climbed onto the foot of the cot, which she had never seen him do, and which she suspected broke a rule, and stayed. And she sat in the chair and kept watch, and she was awake most of the night, but she was awake the way a person keeps watch, not the way a person is afraid of the dark. She had learned there was a difference, and that it was a large one. When the fever was gone, they did the arithmetic together. 10 days of food if she was careful. 2 weeks before he should walk the lines. The numbers did not agree. So he told her where the rabbit snare was set, in the drawer between the two big spruce, and she reset it herself from the porch. And he remembered a tin of dried fish under the second shelf, and she found it, 6 dark, hard pieces, and felt the relief of it in her body. The days after that were the hardest of the winter, and she found she could carry them. She went out to the snare each morning, working across the frozen drawer with a stick for the hip and the dog ranging ahead, and she learned to read the small sign in the snow the way she had learned to read weather and people. And by the 4th day, she brought back a rabbit and laid it on the table without a word, and watched Silas look at it, and then at her. "You reset it right," he said. "You told me how. Told the last 3 people who wintered near me how too. None of them could do it." He turned the rabbit over. "That's a clean take. You didn't let it suffer." It was the closest thing to praise she had heard from him, and she found she had to turn to the fire for a moment before she answered, because praise landed strange on a person who had gone a long time without it. She split the wood. She hauled it in. She kept them both fed on less than either of them wanted, stretching the cornmeal and the beans and the 6 pieces of fish across the days, with the particular skill of a person who had been hungry before and knew how to make hunger wait. And she noticed, somewhere in that hard stretch, that the words had started to change without either of them deciding it. He said "we" now. He said "our wood, our lines, this is how we do a thing here." Small words. He did not seem to know he was using them. She heard every one. The wolves came in the deep of the winter, on a night Silas was gone late to the far line. She heard Bracken first, the low chest rumble climbing into something she had never heard from him. And then she heard them answer, out past the woodshed. 2 voices or 3, thin and high, and closer than any wild thing should have come. The meat was hung in the shed. That was what they wanted. And the shed door was the flimsy one, the one on Silas's list to rehang, and if they got into it, the winter's margin went with them. She did not think about it for long, because thinking was where fear lived. She took the rifle down from over the door, the way she had watched him take it down 100 times, and she checked it was loaded the way he had shown her one idle evening without either of them saying why he was showing her, and she put on his big coat, and she went out onto the porch with the dog pressed hard against her leg. They were shapes at the edge of the light, low and moving. Her hands were not steady. She braced the rifle on the porch rail the way a person braces against the truth, and she did not aim to kill, because she was not sure enough of her aim for that, and a wounded wolf was worse than a whole one. She aimed over them, at the dark, and fired. The sound tore the night open. The rifle kicked into her shoulder hard enough to bruise, and the shapes were gone, just gone, folded back into the trees the way smoke goes, and the meat stayed in the shed. She stood on the porch a long time after, shaking, the dog leaning on her, the rifle heavy in her arms. Not shaking from fear exactly, shaking from the size of the thing she had just done, alone in the dark, and gotten right. When Silas came in an hour later and saw the rifle back over the door, and smelled the powder and looked at her face, he did not ask what happened. He looked at the shed and at her and at the dog, and worked it out. "You fired over them," he said. "Not at them." "I wasn't sure of the shot." He was quiet a moment. "That's the right call. A green hand aims to kill and wounds one, and then you've a hurt wolf that won't leave." He hung his coat. "Most people don't have the nerve to fire high. They panic and aim center and miss everything." He looked at her, and there was a new thing in it. "You've got a steady hand for somebody who was dying in the snow 8 weeks ago." "I had a good reason to get steady," she said. One evening late in that stretch she was sharpening the bone-handled knife on a whetstone by the fire, the way her mother had taught her, long, even strokes, and she felt him watching. "That's an old blade," he said. "It was my mother's. It's the only thing of hers I have. She turned it in the light. She died when I was 14. Fever. My father married Prudence inside a year, and after that there wasn't much room in the house for anything that had been my mother's. This fit in a pocket. So this is what's left. Silas was quiet, working a strip of leather in his hands the way he did in the evenings, some small task that kept them busy. Keep the edge shallow on a blade that thin, he said finally. You take too much off, it won't last you. A thing that's carried you this long, you want it to carry you the rest of the way. She looked at him. It was, she understood, the most he knew how to say about a dead woman he had never met, and a girl who had nearly died in his snow, and it was said entirely in the language of blades and edges, because that was the only language he trusted. I'll keep it shallow, she said. She did not know yet that he had noticed the knife had no sheath, that it rode loose in her pocket, and she was forever afraid of losing it. She did not know he had already begun, on the nights she slept, to make it one. Rowena, he said one evening not long after. He used her name rarely enough that it landed. If something happens to me on the lines, the gold's under the third floorboard by the stove. You'd know what to do. Nothing's going to happen to you. And I'm choosing not to have that conversation today. Today you eat and rest, and we deal with what's in front of us, not the worst thing that might be. He looked at her a long moment and let it go. The leg healed, with a scar that would pull when the weather turned, and a stiffness he managed by walking it out on the porch, rather than complaining. He did not talk about it. She did not ask. They had both grown fluent in the other's silences. What filled the late winter was the longer kind of work. The planning kind. He began preparing the season's pelts, and she took over his records, kept in a battered ledger in the hand of a man who never imagined anyone else would read them. She reorganized without asking and showed him the system once, and he said, "That's better," and that was that. And she began, in the lengthening afternoons, to take a different inventory. Not what they had and how long it would last, but what the cabin needed. The chinking on the north wall had failed and wanted redoing before next winter. The second porch step had been rotting since before she came and would be dangerous in the thaw. The woodpile was low for a full year. She wrote it in the margin of a paper from the ledger. She did not show him. She told herself it was only habit, the habit of a person who managed things by understanding them fully. She did not examine that reasoning too closely. The conversation she had been not having with herself all winter became harder to avoid in March, when the melt came and the world beyond the cabin returned from under the snow. The creek she had heard all winter became a running creek again, dark water at the edges of the ice, and then a proper cold rush of snowmelt. The high peaks showed themselves against a sky starting to hold real blue. Some weeks yet, but the pass would open. And when it opened, she had a bargain to honor. In spring, you leave. She had not forgotten it. She had only put it in a room of her mind she did not visit, the way you keep a door shut on a room where something uncomfortable is stored. But March brought it back with the same reliability that it brought back the creek in the mountains. A thing that had been there all along, only obscured. She caught herself, those March mornings, doing a strange thing. Planning past spring. She would notice the woodpile was low for a full year and think, we'll cut early, and then remember that we would not include her past May. She would look at the bare south slope catching the afternoon sun and think, that would grow beans, and then remember she would not be here to plant them. Each time it happened, she felt the small, cold drop of it. And each time she noticed she was doing it more, not less, as though some part of her had already decided a thing the rest of her had not caught up to. She had no home to return to. She had no family, not in any real sense, not any more. She had no money and no property and no particular place she was going. She had come through that pass with people who had not wanted her, and survived the winter with a man who had not wanted her either when he found her. and who had kept her alive anyway. And in the spring she was supposed to choose a direction and walk in it, alone, as though the winter had been a thing that happened to her rather than a thing she had built. It was Silas who opened the door on it. He came in one late March morning, moving better than he had in months, poured coffee, and stayed standing at the stove with his back to her an unusual length of time. "There's a wagon train comes through the lower pass in May," he said to the wall. "I go down and trade the season's pelts at the post. You could go with them." "All right," she said. "I've gold set by from good years, enough to get you set up somewhere. A town. Portland's grown. Somewhere with more than this." She looked at him. He was looking at nothing, wearing the careful blank face he wore when he said a thing that cost him more than the words. She understood he had been holding this a while, preparing it for her, the plan, the gold, the sensible transition, the way you arrange a thing for someone when you have decided their good matters to you more than what you want. "You want me to go?" she said. "What I want isn't the question. It's one of them." She put her cup down and looked at him directly, more directly than most people could stand, which she had learned he could. "Silas, do you want me to go?" The silence that followed was the third kind. It went on long enough that a log shifted in the fire, and Bracken lifted his head and lowered it again. "No," Silas said. He said it like a true thing he had argued with himself about. "No, I don't want you to go. But what I want doesn't change what's fair to you." She stood up, not for drama. She needed to be standing for this. "I have spent my whole life around people who decided that what they needed mattered more than what I needed, or what I could give, or who I was. My stepmother told my father I was a cost. And my father, who I believed loved me, decided that was arithmetic he could live with." Her voice stayed level. She had made peace with the fact of it, if not the feeling. "I am not doing that again. I am not letting one more person decide what I'm worth and where I belong. So I am asking you straight. Do you want me to stay?" A shorter silence. "Yes," he said. "Then say so. Don't pack my bag and hand me gold and make the choice for me because you've decided you're not worth staying for." That landed. She watched it land, a tightening around his eyes. She had not meant it as a weapon. She had meant it as true, and it was true. "It's not a small thing," he said. "Staying here. It's a hard life. It doesn't get easier. Last winter you saw the easy version, if you can believe it. There are worse ones. I know, I've been living it 4 months. I stitched your leg by firelight and rationed 6 pieces of fish across 10 days and reset a snare with a hip that wanted to quit. I'm not confused about what it is. A hard life gets harder when..." He stopped. "When what?" He looked at her with the expression she had seen only a few times, the one that showed when he came as close to the surface of himself as he allowed, and then stopped, because further was country he did not have easy roads into. "When you care whether someone's all right," he said. "When you found me, you didn't have anyone. You could lose me, and it'd be a hard thing, but a clean one. You stay, and it stops being clean. You've got someone to lose again. So does he." He did not look at her when he said the last part. "I already did that once. Lost the people the caring was for. I'm not sure I'm built to do it twice." She understood then that this was the real fear under all the talk of gold and towns and hard lives. Not that she was a burden, that she was a thing he could lose, the way he had lost whoever had been behind that door in the fire, and that a man who had survived that once by wanting nothing was being asked, at 46, to want something again. "I know," she said, quieter. "I know it does. I know what you're afraid of, and I'm not going to tell you it can't happen, because it can. That's the whole bargain, isn't it? You don't get the caring without the risk of losing it. But I'll tell you what I learned this winter. Freezing, and then not freezing. She stepped closer. The clean version, the one where you don't have anyone to lose, that's not safety. That's just being dead early. I did that for a lot of years. I was clean and safe, and nobody could take anything from me because I had nothing, and I was nobody's. And it nearly let me lie down in the snow, because there wasn't enough on the other side of surviving to make surviving worth the trouble. She held his eyes. You gave me the other side. Don't take it back to keep us both safe. Safe's not worth what it costs. He looked at the window, where the light was coming through the oilcloth pale and gold. He looked at his hands. For a long moment he did not say anything, and she let him have the silence, because she had learned it was where he did his real work. The chinking on the north wall needs redoing, he said at last. She blinked. I know, it's on a list. And the second step. I've known about that since February. It's on the same list. You keep a list, he said. I keep a list. I was thinking, he said slowly, feeling his way over unfamiliar ground the way he'd feel his way across river ice, we could add a room. Not large. The back walls sound, and I've timber enough if I start cutting in April. He paused. More space would help. For a garden, you'd want seed trays somewhere out of the frost. And a body gets tired of one room over years. Over years. She heard it. She did not point it out. She looked at this man, with his scarred neck and his rebuilt knee, and his 11 years of chosen solitude, and his complete inability to say a single thing he actually meant in a direct way, who had just asked her to spend years with him by talking about chinking and seed trays. And she felt something warm move through her chest, and she did not try to name it or manage it. She just let it be there. It would help, she agreed. We should think about a proper root cellar before next fall, too. The cold storage is manageable, but it isn't good. There's a spot on the east side. Grounds not too rocky. I'll add it to the list. He nodded and took his coffee to the table and sat down. She sat across from him. They drank their coffee in the quiet that was not quite silence. Never exactly silence, with the creek now loud outside and the first birds coming back to the timber and Bracken's occasional shift on the floor. But a quiet that had ease in it, the kind that belongs to two people who have been through a thing together that neither would have survived alone, and have stopped pretending otherwise. The wagon train came through the lower pass 6 weeks later, and they went down to the trading post to sell the pelts and buy what a full year needed. She had not expected the noise of it, the press of people after a winter of 2 voices and a dog. She found it overwhelming for 20 minutes, and then she found her footing, and she haggled the price of the pelts herself, and got a better one than the trader offered first, and Silas stood back and let it happen. The trader, an oily man used to dealing with trappers who wanted only to be gone, seemed thrown by a woman who knew the difference between a prime pelt and a rubbed one, and said so, and in the end he paid fair, and looked almost pleased to have been made to. She was choosing boots, her old ones held together in 3 places with rawhide and stubbornness, when she heard the voice behind her. Rowena? She knew it before she turned. She had known that voice her whole life. Her father stood 10 feet away in the crowd of the trading post, thinner than she remembered, older by more than the months accounted for. Behind him, Prudence, her jaw set in the way that added up costs. And the 2 boys, grown taller over a winter, Thomas not quite able to look at her and Cole staring outright. They had a wagon loaded for the west, and they had come to this post the way everyone came to this post. Because there was only the one, and the pass funneled everyone through it. Josiah Ash looked at his daughter like a man looking at a ghost, because to him she was one. He had left her in the snow in November and done the arithmetic and buried her in his mind and gone on west. "You're alive," he said. His voice broke on it. "Rowena, We looked. When the storm cleared, we came back and you, didn't look, Rowena said. She did not say it with heat. That surprised her more than it surprised him. She had imagined this moment 100 times in the dark of that first month, and in every version there had been screaming, hers, loud, years of it coming out at once. But standing here now, in her new boots, with a whole winter behind her that she had survived with her own 2 hands, she found she had no screaming in her, only the truth, which was heavier and did not need to be shouted. I saw the tracks, Papa. I stood in that clearing, and I read them the way you taught me to read ground when I was small. The mule backed up and turned and went east at a walk. Nobody panicked. Nobody was swept off by a spooked animal. You made a choice at a measured pace, and you did not look back. She let it sit. I was there. I saw what the ground said. Don't tell me you came back. Josiah's face came apart. Prudence stepped forward, her chin up, and Rowena watched her decide that the way through this was the way she went through everything, straight ahead and certain. We had 3 others to keep alive, Prudence said. You would have died on that pass and taken all of us with you. Anyone with sense would have. You calculated that I was a cost you couldn't carry, Rowena said, and turned to face her stepmother fully. You looked at my leg and my weight in the wagon, and you ran the numbers, and the math didn't work. I know. I heard you do it. By the fire, 3 weeks before. I've had a whole winter to understand the arithmetic, and I do understand it. That's the part you never counted on. Not that I'd be angry. That I'd understand it completely, and it still wouldn't be forgivable. Her hand went to her coat pocket, to the bone-handled knife that had been her mother's, and closed around it, and drew it out. This is the only thing of my mother's I have. You know that. You watched me carry it for 8 years and never thought it worth taking. She held it up, worn and small and worth almost nothing. I nearly froze to death with this in my pocket. And then I used it to cut a frozen trouser leg off a man who was bleeding to death in the dark. And to clean a wound I stitched shut with my own shaking hands. And he lived. He lived because of me. Her voice did not rise, and it did not shake. You looked at me and saw a cost. I found out this winter I was never that. I was a person who could keep another person alive. I just needed to be somewhere that would let me find it out. And you gave me that, Papa, though you didn't mean to. That's the only thing I'll ever thank you for. Silas had come up beside her. Quiet, the way he moved. He did not speak. He did not need to. He stood a half step behind her shoulder with Bracken at his knee, and his presence said the thing plainly to anyone with eyes. This one is not alone, and not unwanted, and not yours to weigh anymore. Josiah looked at the big scarred trapper, and at the wolf dog with its yellow eyes, and at his daughter standing straight-backed in good boots she had bargained for herself. And something in him seemed to understand at last that whatever he had thrown away in the snow had grown, without his help and partly because of his cruelty, into a thing he no longer had any claim on. "Rowena," he said, "come with us. There's room in the wagon now. Winter's behind us, the worst of the trail. We're going to make a good life out west, and there's a place in it for you. There always." "No, Papa," she said it gently. That was the part she had never once imagined, in all those dark rehearsals. That when the moment came, she would be able to say it gently, and mean the gentleness. "You loved me. I believe that. I think it cost you something to do what you did, and I think you've carried that cost every mile since, and I'm sorry for it. I am. But love and choice are different things. You made your choice on a cold morning in November, and I have built a whole life in the aftermath of it, out of the raw material of being unwanted, and it's mine now. Every board and nail of it is mine." She looked at Prudence and at the 2 boys who would not meet her eyes. "I'm not angry anymore. I spent that in the snow. I'm just not yours to carry or to leave, ever again. Go west. I hope it's good ground." I hope the children you kept never learn what you were willing to do to the one you didn't." And she turned back to the boots and finished paying for them and did not look at her family again and found that her hands were perfectly steady. Behind her she heard them go. The scrape of boots, the low sound of Prudence saying something, the creak of a wagon taking weight. She did not turn to watch. There was nothing back there for her to watch anymore. Outside, loading the sled, Silas said only, "That your people?" "That was my people." He was quiet a moment, settling a bundle of pelts. "You did that better than I could have. You'd have shot them. Considered it." She laughed, surprising herself, and the sound of it was clean. They turned the mule back toward the mountain. The afternoon light was doing the thing it did to the high peaks this time of year, turning the snow between pink and gold. As they were loading the last of the supplies, a woman from the wagon train had crossed to her, 40 or so, with the trail-weathered look of someone who had been moving for months and made peace with it. "You're not with the train," the woman had said. Not quite a question. "No, I live up the mountain." The woman had glanced at Silas loading timber onto the sled and back. "Been up there long?" "Since November." "Through the winter? Alone?" "Not alone." The woman had looked at her with the frank, evaluating look of one woman working out the shape of another's life. "It's hard country," she'd said finally. "It is," Rowena had agreed. "It's also mine." She had not planned to say it. It had come out with the simple certainty of a thing she had known without knowing she knew it, and she had stood with it a moment after it left her mouth, testing it, and found it held. The mountain and the timber and the cold and the particular quality of the air up there. The creek and the cabin and the morning light through the oilcloth. It was hers, not the way a thing is owned, but the way a thing is hers, because she had bled for it. Because a place is not truly yours until you have paid for it in something real. Now, on the sled, with the valley falling away behind them, she said, "The light on those peaks." Silas looked. "March is better. Some years, when the clouds are right, it goes red. Real red." He paused. "You'll see it next March." He said next March the way you mention a season to someone who is going to be there for it. The way you share the calendar of a place with someone who belongs to it. She faced forward again and did not point out that he had done it, because pointing it out might make him careful again. And she did not want him careful. "I want a garden," she said. "South side of the cabin. The sun's good there in the afternoon. We could have beans by midsummer. Ground's hard to break up there. I'll start now and work it in pieces. I'll help. You can help," she said, and let him hear that it was a thing granted, not a thing owed. The cabin came into view through the trees as the light was going, the stone chimney first, then the walls, and the new room framed and open to the sky, waiting on its roof. Bracken was already on the porch, having beaten them home by a wide margin, watching them come with his yellow eyes and his expression of complete neutrality that she had learned, over a winter, was its own kind of welcome. She got down, and her new boots hit the ground solid, and her hip said something mild about the long day, and she told it she would sit soon. She stood and looked at the cabin. Rough, small, in need of more work than any list could hold. Not the home of anyone who had ever had enough help, or enough time, or enough of anything but the will to keep going. Her family had run their numbers on a November morning and decided she was a cost they could not carry. They had looked at her bad leg and her weight in the wagon and decided the math did not work. What they had not calculated was what she would become without them. That was the thing nobody told you about being thrown away by the people who should have kept you. That sometimes, in the right kind of hardship, with the right kind of person standing near, being thrown away is the thing that finally teaches you what you are made of. You find out you can stitch a wound with your hands shaking and get it right. You find out you can face the people who discarded you and speak the truth gently and walk away steady. You find out you can build a life from the raw stuff of being unwanted if you are willing to do the work. Being discarded does not define you. What you build after it does. She was not grateful for what her family had done. She would not perform gratitude for pain that was real and had cost her real things. But she was not sorry to be standing where she stood in front of a rough cabin with a room being added on, with a dog on the porch and a fire waiting inside, and a man unloading a sled who had asked her, in his roundabout wordless way, to stay. She reached into her coat pocket for the bone-handled knife to cut the twine on a bundle, and her fingers found something that had not been there that morning. Silas had made a thing over the winter without telling her, and slipped it into her coat at the post while she was choosing boots, the way he did things he could not say out loud. A sheath. Small, close-grained, worked smooth, sized exactly to her mother's knife, with 3 crooked birds cut into the leather by a man who did not do fine work and had gone slow to get it right. She stood on the porch and turned it over in her hand, and understood. The knife had kept her alive when she had nothing and no one. It had cut a dying man free and cleaned the wound that saved him. It had been her mother's, and then it had been her whole inheritance. And then it had been the one thing she owned that meant she had once belonged to somebody. Now it had a place to rest. Now it was not only a thing for cutting and surviving. It was a thing that belonged somewhere, that had been given a home by someone who wanted it near. The way she did. She slid her mother's knife into the sheath Silas Vane had made for it, and put it back over her heart, and stood a moment longer watching the last light go red on the peaks, early, weeks before he'd said it would. Then she went inside, where the fire was, and the dog was, and the man who had asked her to stay was hanging his coat on the hook by the door, as though she had always been coming home to it, and always would be.